Boy has been charged with killing another teen on a subway platform.
27.9 serious crimes per every 1,000 residents. That's the reality of Hunts Point in the South Bronx right now. To put that in perspective, the average across New York City sits around 15 to 16 per 1,000. We're talking almost double the citywide rate, making this the second most dangerous neighborhood in all of New York City. But what exactly counts as a serious crime? We're looking at the heavy stuff: homicides, aggravated assaults, armed robberies, and sexual assaults. These aren't petty thefts or minor incidents. This is violent crime that fundamentally changes lives. And the numbers from the 41st Precinct, which covers Hunts Point, back this up hard. In 2023 alone, the precinct logged 12 homicides. That's 12 families destroyed in one relatively small area. On top of that, roughly 300 aggravated assaults were reported that same year. These are attacks with weapons, attacks that land people in hospitals, or worse. Robberies and burglaries happen so frequently they barely make local news anymore unless there's something exceptional about them. So where does this rank citywide? Second. Only one other neighborhood in the entire 5 boroughs has worse crime stats. That puts Hunts Point ahead of some of the most troubled parts of Brooklyn, ahead of other notorious Bronx neighborhoods like Mott Haven and Fordham. It's worse than 95% of New York City neighborhoods when it comes to violent crime. Here's what that actually means on the ground. If you live on a block with 100 people in Hunts Point, statistically, almost 3 of your neighbors will be victims of serious crime within a year. Every year. That's the reality residents wake up to. The geographical distribution matters too. Residential side streets see the highest concentration of incidents. The industrial zones, especially at night, turn into danger zones with minimal foot traffic and even less police presence. Meanwhile, main drags like Hunts Point Avenue have more activity and at least some surveillance, but that doesn't make them safe, just less dangerous by comparison. These numbers tell a story, but the reality of Hunts Point is way more complex than any statistic. What you're about to discover about how this neighborhood completely transforms when the sun goes down will make you question whether we're even talking about the same place. During daylight hours, Hunts Point almost feels like a functioning neighborhood. The Hunts Point Cooperative Market draws thousands of workers every morning. Trucks roll in and out constantly. On main streets like Hunts Point Avenue, you'll see legitimate business happening, bodegas open, people heading to work, the usual urban rhythm. People who've explored the area during the day, documented in multiple YouTube videos, report feeling relatively safe. One video shows a guy walking through for nearly an hour in broad daylight without incident. Reddit users who asked about visiting Echo, this, daytime, especially mornings, seems manageable if you stay aware and stick to busier areas. Then the sun sets and everything changes. The transformation is dramatic. Residential streets empty out fast. Street lighting is terrible in most areas, creating dark pockets where visibility drops to almost nothing. The foot traffic that provided some safety during the day vanishes. What replaces it is concerning. Gang activity ramps up after dark. Drug distribution becomes more visible in certain zones. Locals report avoiding going out after specific hours, particularly on side streets away from main thoroughfares. The prostitution that exists in parts of Hunts Point becomes more apparent once darkness falls. It's not uniform across the whole neighborhood, though. Commercial streets maintain some level of activity even at night. The areas immediately around the market see workers at all hours because operations run 24/7. But venture into the residential blocks or the industrial dead zones and you're in a completely different environment. Think about that for a second. The same streets that seem navigable at 2 in the afternoon become genuinely dangerous by 10 at night. It's like 2 separate neighborhoods occupying the same physical space, switching places depending on whether the sun is up or down. The Reddit discussion from 2021 is consistent on this point. User after user says basically the same thing. During the day, with precautions, it's doable. At night, it's a different story entirely. They recommend traveling in groups, not showing valuables, staying on lit streets. One person put it bluntly, "I wouldn't walk around there alone after dark, and I grew up in the Bronx." Even the Urban Explorer videos filmed during relatively safe daytime hours capture an underlying tension. You can see it in how quickly people walk, how they glance around, the general wariness and body language. The Hunts Point Cooperative Market processes billions of pounds of produce annually. It's one of the largest food distribution centers in the entire world, operating every single hour of every single day. Thousands of trucks move through this area constantly, carrying food that feeds millions of people across the Northeast. But here's the thing about having a massive industrial operation dropped into a residential neighborhood. It creates weird dynamics that affect everything, including safety. The market generates jobs, sure, but it also creates these vast industrial zones that are essentially dead space for residents. We're talking entire streets dominated by warehouses, processing facilities, and truck depots. During loading hours, it's chaotic with activity. Outside those times, these areas become ghost towns. Workers who spend their days at the market have a completely different experience of Hunts Point than people who actually live there. Most market employees arrive early morning, work their shifts, and leave before evening. They're interacting with the daytime version of the neighborhood, and often they're in secured areas or moving directly from vehicle to workplace. Residents, on the other hand, deal with the consequences around the clock. The constant truck traffic tears up residential streets. Noise pollution is relentless. Diesel fumes hang in the air. And those industrial dead zones, at night, they become perfect spots for illegal activity because there's nobody around to witness anything. You've got these massive parking areas for trailers and commercial vehicles. Security focuses on protecting valuable cargo, not on general neighborhood safety. It's not uncommon for theft to happen in these areas, both from trucks and from anyone unfortunate enough to be walking through. The infrastructure itself tells you what's prioritized. Everything is designed for moving big trucks efficiently. Sidewalks are often an afterthought. Pedestrian crossings are dangerous. Street lighting caters to vehicle traffic, leaving pedestrian areas poorly lit. This creates what urban planners call eyes on the street problem. In mixed-use neighborhoods where people live, work, and shop in the same areas, there's natural surveillance. Criminal activity happens less because there are always people around. But in Hunts Point, the industrial zoning means huge chunks of the neighborhood are deserted at night. No witnesses, no deterrent. To understand why Hunts Point sits at 27.9 crimes per thousand today, you need to look at what happened here over the past 40 years. This neighborhood wasn't always synonymous with danger, but a perfect storm of factors in the 80s and 90s basically destroyed it. The crack epidemic hit Hunts Point like a bomb. Through the mid-80s into the 90s, this area became ground zero for the drug crisis that devastated urban America. Homicide rates during those years were absolutely insane compared to today. Gang warfare over drug territory turned certain blocks into war zones. Property abandonment became massive. Landlords walked away from buildings. Entire structures sat vacant, becoming squats for drug activity and other illegal operations. The visual decay fed a cycle where anyone with means left, property values crashed further, and the neighborhood spiraled. Prostitution exploded during this period, particularly in the industrial areas where there was no residential oversight. Hunts Point gained a notorious reputation that persists even now, decades later. It became shorthand nationally for urban collapse. But here's what's interesting. Things have actually improved significantly from those peak crisis years. Crime rates today, while still terrible by city standards, are way down from the 90s. Homicides dropped from 50-60 per year in the precinct to the 12 we saw in 2023. That's still 12 too many, but it shows movement in the right direction. Community policing initiatives started showing results in the 2000s. Addiction treatment programs reduced some of the most visible drug activity. Limited investment in infrastructure fixed up certain areas. New community leadership developed. People committed to improving conditions rather than just surviving them. Yet despite these improvements, Hunts Point remains in the top tier of dangerous New York neighborhoods. Why? Because the underlying conditions that create crime, poverty, lack of economic opportunity, failing schools, deteriorated housing, never got adequately addressed. Each generation faces the same traps. Young people grow up seeing gang life as their most viable option because legitimate opportunities are scarce. The cycle perpetuates itself. Trauma from violence creates mental health issues that go untreated. People who manage to achieve some stability often move out, taking their stabilizing influence with them. What remains is concentrated disadvantage that's incredibly hard to break. The 41st Precinct has one of the toughest jobs in the NYPD. They're responsible for an area that includes Hunts Point and surrounding neighborhoods, dealing with that 27.9 crime rate with resources that never seem adequate to the task. Those 12 homicides in 2023 don't happen in isolation. Each one requires massive investigative resources. Same with the 300 aggravated assaults. Then you've got hundreds of robberies, burglaries, drug arrests, and everything else that comes with policing a high-crime area. The call volume is relentless. The precinct has tried implementing community policing strategies, officers assigned to foot patrols to increase visible presence, meetings with community leaders to address specific concerns, youth programs sponsored through the department to try reaching kids before they get involved in criminal activity. Some of this has worked in localized areas, but scaling it up across the whole neighborhood has proven difficult. Part of the problem is simply resources. The 41st is consistently understaffed relative to the demands placed on it. Response times can stretch during peak periods because there aren't enough units available. Officers burn out from the constant stress and volume of serious incidents they deal with. The layout of Hunts Point creates tactical challenges you don't see in more traditional residential neighborhoods. Those massive industrial zones require coverage but generate relatively few calls, so resources get pulled away. Then when something does happen in those areas, response is delayed because units are far away handling other calls. Coordinating with other agencies adds complexity. The market has its own security concerns that sometimes require NYPD involvement. Port Authority jurisdiction overlaps in some areas. Multiple agencies operating in the same space without perfect coordination creates gaps that criminals exploit. And the criminal networks operating in Hunts Point aren't amateurs. They adapt tactics constantly. Surveillance gets countered, officers get recognized and avoided. The sophistication level is higher than people might expect. There's also the trust issue. In communities that have historically had tense relationships with police, gaining cooperation for investigations is tough. Witnesses don't come forward. People handle problems themselves rather than calling police. This makes solving crimes harder and prevents the kind of community-police partnership that actually reduces crime long-term. The precinct is trying, but they're fighting uphill against decades of accumulated problems with one hand tied behind their back. Residents aren't just sitting around waiting for someone else to fix Hunts Point. Grassroots organizations have been organizing for years, trying to reclaim their neighborhood from the violence and neglect. Community groups run volunteer neighborhood patrols. These aren't vigilantes, just residents walking their blocks, being visible, reporting problems to authorities. It creates that eyes on the street effect in areas where it's otherwise absent. Several blocks have seen measurable reductions in certain types of crime because of these efforts. After-school programs keep kids occupied during the hours they're most vulnerable to gang recruitment. These programs run on shoestring budgets, often in church basements or community centers that have seen better days. But they're providing spaces where young people can be safe, get homework help, participate in activities that don't involve criminal enterprise. The Hunts Point Express, a local news outlet, documents what's happening on the ground. They report crimes that larger media outlets ignore. They cover community meetings and activism. They give residents a platform to voice concerns and hold authorities accountable. This kind of local journalism is crucial but increasingly rare. Advocacy organizations pressure the city for more investment, better street lighting, infrastructure repairs, improved schools, economic development that creates legitimate job opportunities. Progress is slow, but there have been wins. Certain areas have seen improvements directly traceable to community organizing efforts. Youth mentorship programs connect young people with positive role models. Job training gives teenagers alternatives to street economy. These initiatives show promising results, but they're limited by funding. For every kid who gets reached, several others slip through the cracks. Then there's the gentrification question. New development is starting to change parts of Hunts Point. New housing, new businesses, rising property values. On one hand, this brings investment and improvements. Better buildings, cleaner streets, new economic activity. On the other hand, longtime residents are being priced out. Families who've lived in Hunts Point for generations can't afford rising rents. They're being displaced to other areas, often taking their community ties and stabilizing influence with them. It's a complicated situation. Does gentrification improve safety by bringing in resources, or does it just push problems elsewhere while displacing the very people who've been fighting to improve their neighborhood? Community voices are divided on this. So what's the actual truth about Hunts Point? Is it really as dangerous as that 27.9 crimes per thousand suggests? Or is the reputation worse than reality? The answer is both, depending on context. Those statistics are real. The 12 homicides happened. The 300 assaults happened. People genuinely get hurt in this neighborhood at rates that are unacceptable. Anyone telling you it's completely safe is lying or hasn't spent real time there. But reducing Hunts Point to just a crime statistic misses important nuance. Thousands of people live their lives there, going to work, raising families, participating in their community. They're not in constant danger every second. They've learned how to navigate their environment, which streets to avoid, what times are riskier, how to minimize exposure to violence. The documented experiences from visitors tell us something useful. During daytime hours in commercial areas with basic precautions, the risk is manageable. It's not zero, but it's manageable. Stick to main streets, don't flash valuables, stay aware of your surroundings, and you'll probably be fine. That's not the same as safe, but it's not a war zone either. Nighttime is genuinely different. The risks multiply significantly when darkness falls, especially in residential areas and industrial zones. The advice from people who know the area is consistent: avoid it after dark unless you have a specific reason to be there and know what you're doing. The label of second most dangerous neighborhood in NYC carries weight because it's statistically accurate, but it also perpetuates stigma that affects everyone living there. It influences how resources get allocated, how outsiders view the community, how residents themselves internalize their situation. Hunts Point is at a crossroads. Continued community organizing, adequate investment from the city, effective policing that builds rather than destroys trust, these things could catalyze real change. Or gentrification could transform the area by displacing longtime residents without actually solving underlying problems, just moving them somewhere else. What shouldn't happen is writing off the neighborhood entirely. Thousands of people call this place home. They deserve better than they're getting. The complexity of Hunts Point's situation demands complexity in response, not simplistic labels or abandonment. The statistics reveal real problems requiring real solutions, but the humanity of the people living there matters just as much.